All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Erick Garcia, and I'm the host of Denver Droids. We basically showcase the diversity of libraries, programming languages, basically anything mobile related. Most of the time, we lean towards Android topics, but from time to time, we bring in also programming interview basics and some some ways to share code with iOS or also microservices and backend. I'm currently based in Denver, Colorado for now. Um, and I'm a principal Android engineer with Prokarma nowadays named Concentrix. For them, I have worked in a diversity of projects, including leading the development of medical applications for Dignity Health. Also participated for several years in a project with Kaiser Permanente as part of the core team. And there's exciting new projects coming up pretty soon as well with one of the major telecoms. Other than that, in my free time, I'm very passionate about software architecture and best practices. And along the years, I have learned a diversity of architectures and techniques that I would love, that I'm passionate about sharing with a greater community. I also love sports, being tennis my favorite one. I'm somewhat of a green thumb. So when it comes to plants and trees, I tend to have a diversity, especially I love trees that produce food that you can eat. So that's something that I do in my free time. And last but not least, at the core, I'm just passionate about Linux and all the areas Linux can be deployed. Could be on your watch, on your fridge, on your cell phone, on your desktop. As of lately, I have seen that there's no end where this kernel can go to. If you want to reach out to me anytime, there's my LinkedIn. I'm usually very responsive and passionate about mentoring and giving advice for anyone trying to join the IT field or someone that wants to get some help to land a job with one of the FANG companies. So today's topic is Kotlin itself. And this time, in previous sessions, it has been more of a presentation mode. In this particular workshop, we're going to be directly doing some code together. And I'll be showcasing what does each instruction do. And I'll be open for any questions during the coding session. So please, if you haven't already installed IntelliJ IDEA, or if you have already at hand Android Studio, you can also follow up with the exercises we're going to be doing today. Other than that, Kotlin is a cross-platform, statically typed general purpose programming language. What does that mean is, at least in the, what does that mean is Kotlin, the programming language, can be used on different platforms. For example, mobile Android. There's also backend solutions that you can implement with Kotlin. And as of lately, they have been working on multi-platform in such a way that you can deploy some of your Kotlin code to iOS apps. Although there's some limitations on that regard, but still, it's just like with Java. If there's a virtual machine that can that can run Java, it can also run Kotlin, because it's compatible with Kotlin in the general sense. It also translates into bytecode and gets executed by the JVM. Now, you'll ask, if Java is more common than Kotlin, why have people been migrating to it as of lately? And the reason is, and you will see with the syntax, is that it's less verbose, that with less code, you will be able to accomplish more. But also more importantly, and this is one of the key aspects that I really like about Kotlin, and a lot of developers had the same feedback, is the fact that in Java, any object at any time can be null, but in Kotlin, there's a way to distinguish between what can be null and what cannot be null. So you can handle special scenarios for those objects that can be null. And but you don't have to put all over your code base scenarios where you have to handle nullability. So having had that introduction, I will say why Kotlin could be somewhat you would be interested in learning. Why Kotlin would be a great tool for your career if you're a software developer or if you're aspiring to be a software developer. First of all, there's a wide diversity of programming languages out there. Unfortunately, some of those languages are somewhat outdated and are quite complex, and also don't have the multi-platform capabilities that Kotlin has. So first and foremost, I will say mental sanity. If you're getting started or you want to go into Android developer, into Android development, Android native application development, Kotlin is a very friendly yet powerful way to develop your apps. Second of all, many of the FAANG companies also use Kotlin in some shape. So if for any reason they're not required to use Java for a particular reason, they're going to be using Kotlin instead. And if they're not using Kotlin already, they're migrating to Kotlin. So it is something you're constantly going to see during your career. Third of all, I will say you can consider it as a great icebreaker. Why not? You might be on a bar and you might have some technical friends and you might discuss about why Kotlin and Java, right? And just get some good times talking about the advantages of each over the other. Finally, as of many companies, it has as of lately become somewhat of an industry standard. So you will see it more often and that whatnot. There's some companies that are already in Kotlin. There's projects that have fully migrated to Kotlin, or most of the code base has already been migrated. Eventually, if possible, if time allows, I'll try to cover some advanced topics in a second session, depending on what is the interest. For example, I could implement some searching algorithms or sorting algorithms using Kotlin. For now, I'm going to focus more into the data structures and some of the basics like the variables and how to get your environment set up. But if there's interest in the future, I can bring more in-depth advanced topics on Kotlin. So let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and get started. By the way, any questions so far?
When you do programming, do you prefer IntelliJ over Android Studio, or is it just dependent on what you're doing?
Yeah, so when it comes to Android applications, I definitely prefer Android Studio.
Right.
In this case, since not everyone might be familiar with Android itself, and we're going to be focusing more on the Kotlin side, I'm going to be using IntelliJ IDEA. But both programs are great. Both are made by JetBrains,
Yeah,
and they have an extremely similar interface.
Yeah.
So as I said, if you have Android Studio and you happen to know how to create a Kotlin project or run some Kotlin code that is not Android related, you're more than welcome to use it. So for those that already have IntelliJ IDEA installed, we're going to create a new project. And we're gonna do a few simple exercises. So first of all, make sure that on the left side you select Kotlin. And in this case, we're gonna be doing an application that will be printing text into the console. So you can give it any name. So you can say Kotlin getting, let me see if I can get this out of the way. Okay, looks like I ended up having an untitled project by accident, but that's okay. What we're focusing on here is on the main file, since we're gonna be doing a few operations in here. So far, if you follow the steps of creating a new project, terminal application, you should have here a main, which is gonna be the entry point for the Kotlin code or the Kotlin program. The same thing happens in Java. There's a small difference. For those of you who have used Java, usually this would be a public static void main with a string args, right? So this would be this over here is the equivalent in Kotlin. So the very first thing I want everyone to do, just to make sure that the program is running correctly. Let me go ahead. I'm gonna close this. Is to make sure you can run it. There should be on the left side a plus button, although I think it's still indexing the dependencies. Okay, now we're ready. So first of all, make sure that your programming environment is correctly set up. We should be seeing right now the terminal with the typical hello world. So from now on, I'm going to be writing some code and explaining like a Kotlin variable and a function and adding, doing some math operations. But before we get it there, have most of you been able to get to this point? Okay, let's check in the chat. Okay, I don't see any major questions over here, so I'm gonna keep going. So the first thing I want you to do is I'm gonna explain a function in here, particularly for Kotlin. So for those of you that know Java, usually it would be somewhere like public, I don't know, do something, actually do something. So usually you have to say the return type, you have to give a function a name, and you have to pass some parameters. Now with Kotlin, what you need to do is you need to call fun. That is for a function, and then you do the name of the function. Now the difference with Java is instead of putting the return type in here, it goes over here. So I'm going to create the function in here. I'm going to create a function that adds two integers together, two ints together. I'm gonna say this is int. This is int. And this returns, since we don't know if they will fit, I'm gonna return a double. Oh, I have to make this a double. Well, I'm gonna keep it simple and just keep it as int, but it should be a bigger variable. Otherwise, we can have overflow. We're getting too technical. So the first thing you see is here you have a function, right? That's fun, the fun identifier. Second of all, here you have the function name. Third of all, you have here the parameters. As you can see, the main difference with Java or other languages is that you have to say the variable type after the variable name. So on Java, you will put first the variable type and then the name. On Kotlin, you have to do it afterwards. Other than that, some of the operations between both languages are very similar. As you can see, here's how you add two ints together. So as you would with any programming language, here you can call it. Now, here is another new thing. When you try to save, when you need to create a variable, there's var and there's val. And I'll explain the two in just a moment. So I'm going to print the result. So basically, to declare a variable in Kotlin, you use the val or you use the var identifier. Now, the main difference is when it comes to val, it is a variable that you cannot change. It would be similar to final in Java. Var is more of a just a regular variable where you can change what it is pointing at. So you can create a new object instance and change it, or you can change the contents of the. If it's a primitive, you can change the value of the primitive. So here I'm going to show you what happens if we try to modify result. If you see, it is not letting us. This is a shorthand for adding, incrementing by 1. If you see this one, it is allowing us to modify the value of that primitive, of that int.
Plus equals is just adding one. Also, for those who don't not used to that syntax.
Thank you, Nathan. Another way of representing the same would be like this. Or so usually the shorthand is preferred, but this is basically the same. As you can see, val cannot be, you cannot change the value of val. So that's one of the main difference, but this is how you create a variable. Now, you're gonna ask, or one of the questions a person might have, especially a beginner with Kotlin might have, why are we not telling or explicitly saying the type? Because on Java, the syntax would be more like, You say the type, you say the variable name, and then here you will do the actual operation. Now, with Kotlin, most of the time, you will not have to be explicit if you're already saving a variable. Like if you're saving a value into a variable, most of the time you will not have to tell the type, because the compiler will try to figure out what the variable should be. So if you're saving an int value into the variable, it will initialize it as an int. If you're saving a string, it will initialize it as a string without you having to explicitly saying so. But if you want to, you can actually declare the type. So that's also an option.
How many people have worked with Java here? Is it as most? Okay, yeah, I see Ken says he has. I'm just curious of the group if there are a bunch of Java or JavaScript or some other language.
Mm-hmm. So those are like some of the basic steps on having your variable, right? And having a function and returning returning a variable or an object within the function. So those are like the basic steps. I'm going to go deeper into Kotlin. I'm going to start talking about nullability. Does anyone have any question on these first few steps? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start working on the second exercise. All right, so we have once more our main function. The next thing I want to talk about is one of the most beautiful things about Kotlin, and it is nullability and nullability handling. So with other programming languages, you can do something like creating a text or a string. And then do something like null, right? You can say, I'm creating a variable. I'm creating a variable that is supposed to be a string of the string type, but I'm not going to be assigning the value yet. And this is perfectly valid syntax for Java. For Kotlin, you can follow the same approach, or you can create a variable that you will initialize sometime later. So I'm going to start with the basic example, which is creating a null variable. So I'm going to give it the same name. Now, if you want to make it null, you need to declare it as a string, but as an optional. And you can even initialize it if you want with null. So what this is doing is you are creating the variable, you're giving the type, but also you're letting the language know that this particular variable can be null, and you're doing this with a question mark. And that is very important, and I will mention it in a few minutes when we go through that. But this is very important to know, because with Kotlin, you can safely interact with this type of variables, and there's ways to handle them so that you don't have null pointer exceptions. So I'm going to put here, this is a nullable variable. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a non-nullable variable. Now, here, if you see here, we cannot make it null. And that is because this variable it's still a string, but it doesn't have the question mark, which means it always has to have a value. So if you initialize it, you can start using it. But other than that, when you start interacting with the variable, the fact that it doesn't have a question mark, the fact that it's not nullable, makes it safe for you to go and start doing operations like size or length. Usually, if you were to try this in Java with a null, you might get a null pointer exception. So first of all, I'm going to show you here what happens. If you see, Kotlin is already identifying that this particular variable might be null and is warning you that what you're doing, it is not safe and can lead to a null pointer exception. Like it can lead to a crash because this variable, if it's null and you try to interact with it, it will be a problem. And Kotlin is letting you know ahead of time. And that's also one of the beauties against other programming languages, because in Java, this would be valid syntax. It might give you a warning. Some of the newer compilers, or especially like IntelliJ, it might let you know that you haven't initialized the variable, but strictly speaking, it is valid syntax. Whether in Kotlin, it is not. Any questions so far before I move to the next step? Okay, looks like we don't have any questions so far. So in here, what you need to do is if you have a nullable variable and you need to access the value or interact with that variable, you place a question mark, which basically means that if that variable happens to not be null, if it actually has a value, it will execute the operation. But if it actually does not have a value and it is null, it will skip the instruction. It will not execute it. The next thing you can do is, so this is a safe operation. It will skip if the variable is null, it will skip it. The second thing you can do is do a let statement. And we're talking about how to handle scenarios where your variable might be null. So let will evaluate your variable, and if it's and if the variable it happens to be not null, if you see here in the block of code that is inside of between these two braces, it will actually let you interact with it in a safely manner. So the only way you can do an operation inside of this block of code on the variable is if the text is not null. So I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate this behavior by printing some of this interaction. So over here, gonna go ahead and put a print statement. I'm gonna put here some indicators so that we know what's happening. So here's the first example. Here's the second example. I'm going to print it. So let's run this code and see what happens. Oh, I should have used print line. So if you see here, the operation, it didn't crash. I mean, the code didn't actually crash. It does know that there is a variable inside of the print lane, but if you see, the length didn't get executed. So this part didn't get executed, but this part did get evaluated. So as you can see, this over here is highly valuable for interacting with your code because it will help you prevent null pointer exceptions, which is one of the many areas where code goes wrong. I actually call the null pattern. Well, not only myself, but most importantly, there's many authors, and I agree with them, that they call the null pattern or the null operator or to be the $1 million mistake, because you might end up with many unnecessary code that handles particular scenarios that might or might not happen, and you don't know. In other languages, you don't know if it can or should be null. In here, you do, and that's one of the many areas that I like about Kotlin. Here in this second example, as you can see, this code didn't get executed at all. So as you can see, everything, if this is null, anything coming after this question mark will not get executed. So now let's see what happens when I actually give it a value.
What would happen if that line is skipped, but the skipped line is a condition for future lines?
That's a great question. So basically, to prevent that scenario, we have the let statement. So if you're interacting, let's say, how can I phrase it? So let's say that you have some code that depends on this not getting skipped. You need to put it inside of the let. Or you can safely unwrap the variable. But in general, I will say most of the scenarios that you will encounter where you're trying to validate if this is not null, you're going to put inside of a let statement.
Maybe we can write the like the traditional Java way of doing this in an if-else block. If my text equals null equals null.
Yes.
So we
right.
can see the equivalent Java style of code.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Nathan. So here it would be a very similar example that you will have on Java for this particular scenario where the variable is null. So on Java, you will find most of the time, if my text is not null, right? And then you will have else. And then here you do
This is one of those cases where you can actually write this in the same way as you would write it in Kotlin if you want. The only difference being the semicolon that is required in Java. We wouldn't need that in Kotlin, but this is one case where they read fairly similarly.
Yeah, that is true. So for Kotlin, it's exactly the same. In this case, it matches the syntax. So I can just go ahead And so if you remember in Java, we had this everywhere, right? And with Kotlin, we can have something more concise, but also you can have an else statement or do something else if it's null. So there's also the else operator that you can use for nullability purposes. So for example, if you have my text and then you want to evaluate, let's say this would be like an else. Let me see. I rarely use it, but I believe it's like this.
And then a Kotlin.run or something, or just the Lambda is fine. Yeah. I actually kind of like the way that Java looks in this specific instance. It's more clear to me that if my text is equal to null or not equal to null, we do something. But in Kotlin, it's idiomatic to do it in the way that Eric is writing it here.
Yeah, there's multiple ways of doing this operation. Oh, there it is. In Kotlin, you can do the if else that you always do, but also you can do a let statement. So this code will get executed in case that variable is not null. But also if you want, if for any reason you want to have something else get executed in case that it is null, here you can have many operations. So let's run it. Here's the third example. If it's not null, I'm going to print it. So here, because I already gave a value, we're printing the length of the string. So in this example, it got printed without problems. In the second example, because we already have some text and it is not null, it is also printing the length. The third example, this happened as well. Now I'm going to make it null so everyone sees what's happening in here. So if you see in here, this got ignored, this got evaluated, and here this got ignored, this got evaluated, and in here this got ignored, this got evaluated. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of flexibility on how to handle scenarios where the variable might be null. But the beauty of this also is that if you create a function, I'm going to delete this part over here. If you create a function, you can make it explicit that you will only take object instances or parameters that are not null. So here I'm going to receive if you see I don't have a question mark in here, so that means it can any text that I receive should not be null. So let me show you what happens here if I send my text. As you see here, because the variable can be null and the compiler doesn't know if I suddenly decided to do, right? The compiler doesn't know. If I suddenly decided it might have a value before, but now I decided it will not have a value, it will force me to do something to be able to call this function, because this function has made it explicit that only wants non-nullable objects. Now, if the function were to be declared like this, now the function is letting the caller know that it is okay. It will accept an object if it's null or if it's not null. But in this case, I want to showcase here in Kotlin, you can say my function does not take null. So as a developer, what you need to do is you need to do something like this. You need to do the let over here. So if you see here, we already have a let statement. And this string over here that you can also name if you want. So you can name it, because by default, the name of the variable that is this one inside of it is going to be it. But in this case, I wanted to give it a name. This name or this variable is already safe. It has been validated that is not null. So here you can safely call the function. So let's run it. Let me see, did I call it? Oh, I made it null. Well, as you can see, I made it null. So this part over here got ignored. It didn't get executed. Now I'm going to make it not null. So you can see now it got printed. This over here got executed. Any questions so far on the nullability, on variables that might be null, how to handle the scenarios where the variable might be null? Okay, so I'm going to start with a data structure. I'm going to save this. Eventually, I will upload this code for everyone to have. Probably I might send it up on email, maybe just a Kotlin class. But ideally, if you guys can follow along and copy it on your IDE as I'm coding, the better.
Is everybody able to code along with this for the most part?
Yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. So I'm going to go into the basic data structures and how to interact with them using Kotlin. So the most basic data structure, the one that is commonly known, is a list. And a list can contain objects, right? And in Java, the syntax would be more or less like this. Let's say list of array list. Don't remember the exact syntax, but it should be somewhere like this. On Kotlin, what you do is, in this case, I'm going to do a variable, a mutable variable. And here, I'm going to call it my items. First, I'm going to clarify this in Java. And this would be like this. So basically, Kotlin already has built-in multiple ways of creating an instance of a data structure. So in this case, we were in an array list. So you do it with lowercase because it's you're calling a method. You're not directly initializing the class like here. So this over here will return you an array list that is capable of storing string objects. And this is how it will look like in Java. So as with any list, you can go ahead and add elements to it. So here I'm going to say hello. And here I'm going to do droids. One of the things that I also like about Kotlin is it has a shorthand to access an item on the list. There's a way to access the items directly without having to do much code. So I'm going to do access the first item. And I'm going to access the, if you see the syntax to access is like if it were to be an array. And that is because it's an array list. But if you see we are accessing directly, I haven't done this in a while, but I think in Java, it will be more like my items, and I think it would be get or something like that. So if you see, the syntax can be very friendly and it has multiple ways of doing things. And also eventually I'll go into objects and getters and setters, which in Kotlin are very easy to work with and to generate as well. So in a summary, as you can see with Kotlin, we can achieve, and unfortunately in these examples I have given is not that easy to see, but trust me when I say that you can do way more with way less code. It reduces the amount of words that you need to use to achieve a desired effect or feature. So here's the first item. I'm accessing it directly. And then it already has a few items in here. To go through the list, for those who use Java, there's two ways of traversing data structures in Java. One is to do a for each. This is Java. So in Java, you would do, if you want to go through every item on the list, on Java, you will have to do for string text in my items in the array, right? In Kotlin, you do it very similar, but with a small difference. You will do for, and then I think you need to do, well,
You can just
text.
do items, item in items also for this for loop. Text in my items.
You're right.
It'll,
I don't
yeah,
need the
with,
val. You're right.
yeah.
So if you can see, it reduces a little bit, and it also allows you to start working with the variable. I know that, for example, removing a thing here and there doesn't sound like much, but eventually when you start putting things together and having nested operations or more complex code, you will see how it piles up. But for now, this is how you do a for each in Kotlin. Now, when it comes to the indexed-based approach. In Kotlin, it is unfortunately a little bit more complicated. So in Java, you can do usually a for I and I, while I is lesser than array length, I++, that would be the traditional Java. In Kotlin is not the same. In Kotlin, you have to do more like for.
There's
and then
actually a for
I
each
and.
indexed also, which I believe is slightly better than Java, but it's basically the same. I don't know that they're very different. Oh, this is, yeah, I like this syntax as well.
Can you tell me the syntax? I don't remember the other one. The indexed.
Yeah, there is a call called for each indexed, and you actually have to call it on my items and then dot for each indexed.
Interesting. I learned
Dot
something
for
today.
each indexed. Capital E, I believe. Yes. And then it passes an index S, and you can do tab, index, and you can, S is the string. This is very Kotlin-y, but
Wow. Thank you.
Java and Kotlin are very similar in this when it comes to loops. They're, yeah, that's just, this syntax is slightly different.
Well, I learned something today. I haven't used this one for each indexed. Usually I'm using this alternative way of doing things.
Yeah, it's just window dressing.
Mm-hmm.
But,
So
you know,
for those that haven't seen this part over here, basically what you're doing is you're creating your variable and you're saying that this variable is going to loop one by one from starting from 0 and ending in my items.size.
I would also change my items.size to be my items.size -1. Yes.
Yeah.
And you have to put, and then if you hit Option Enter, it will refactor this for you, I believe.
Until.
Yeah, until is the super Kotlin-y way, but I don't really like this sometimes because it makes it less clear to sometimes newer people.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go ahead and put both. So there we have multiple ways of doing loops. So far, any question on this aspect? Okay. It looks like there's no questions. Now we're reaching 7 p.m. So let's see. Any question on any of the previous topics? Has everyone been able to follow along so far? Okay, let me check on the chat real quick. What do we have? Cool, yes, I'm just learning. Step into Kotlin, I don't want to back. Yes, so true. I don't want to go back into Java either.
I like Java still, but Kotlin is safer and more concise for the most part.
Right. I mean, it's okay. I actually been mentoring a few developers on Java. They're going through their first Java learning course, and it's not terrible. I mean, it's a good language compared to some other languages that came before it. But honestly, whenever I got the chance, I follow with Kotlin.
Question for you guys. When you guys use Gradle, do you still use Groovy or have you switched to Kotlin?
I personally use Groovy scripts. Other people feel okay with Kotlin scripts, but I don't like certain aspects of the Kotlin scripts. So I use Groovy, but that's just me.
Yeah, you will find a little bit of everything out there. Depends
If
on
you
the
do a
project.
Kotlin multi-platform project, unfortunately, you are boxed into Kotlin Gradle scripts. And it's been a while since I've done a Kotlin multi-platform talk. It was April of last year, but I'm going to do one this year with my updates from all of the different ways in which I've been stabbed by Kotlin multi-platform. It's been a wild ride. Jim, do you use Kotlin in production? I'm curious, or Java?
Our application is pretty much all Kotlin, but it's just a veneer over a multitude of backend Java services. So yeah, the backend services are in Java, but the actual Android portions are in Kotlin. So it's kind of weird. I've been
Okay.
trying to advocate management that since we're using Kotlin for our Android app, why don't we just use Kotlin first for the backend services as well, or at least incorporate some classes or some utilities, some minor services into the backend?
That actually sounds great.
A lot of companies are doing that right now. Brex, DoorDash. DoorDash is probably the biggest company to adopt Kotlin across their entire backend, but that's becoming a more common choice for those shops that have been using Java and want to continue to use the JVM. I've also seen a lot of people going to Golang for backend services.
Most of our backend services that touch the cloud, cloud engineering is all Golang. Go's awesome.
Yeah, I use Golang myself personally, but yeah, I love Kotlin for its safety and its conciseness.
I gotta
So
hop
I'm
off.
gonna.
Wonderful call, guys.
Mhm.
Bye.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for attending. And I'm just gonna finalize showing the data types. I did forget about mentioning those, but they're very consistent with other languages. So I'm gonna just show here. There's an int. There's a double. There's a string. And you can declare it to be explicit if you want. Otherwise, the compiler will figure it out. It will to understand what type of variable are you saving here. So this is pretty much everything for this initial session. I'm potentially going to do more sessions to further explain, to go deeper into Kotlin. But basically, I want it to be this more of a lab where everyone gets to do and to explore and to follow with the exercises all along. And also to ask questions if anyone has questions. So feel free again.
I missed the beginning of the meeting. Did everybody do intros?
Not this
No,
meeting.
not today.
Oh. Well, my name's Nathan. It's nice to meet y'all.
What's going on, Nathan?
It's good to see you.
You as well.
I tried to add most people to LinkedIn. I don't know that I got everybody, but yeah.
So I'm curious. I've been studying Kotlin for a couple months now. This is my first foray into programming, like at all. But I love the idea of the language. I seem to understand it decently. I've gotten through a Udemy course, and I just got done doing a book, Big Nerd Ranch Guide to Kotlin. But now I'm looking for like